everybody, Hillary Patterson here with you, and today I'd like to talk to you about pilot time building. I have over 20 years experience in the aviation industry, uh, 10 of that in recruiting, and I've conducted thousands of interviews and I've seen good and bad. So I wanted to share with you today some pointers about time building. There are ways that are going to build you up and prepare you better for the next step. And there are also ways that are going to kind of dull your skill set a little bit, as seen in interviews with people with that type of background, when they come to the interview. So I'm going to tell you about the most common ways of time building, and then go over kind of the pros and the cons and maybe some pointers on, if you are doing the time building that way, maybe some things you can do to help keep yourself very current. Airline training is extremely intense. So if you're someone that is building time and you're looking to go to a passenger carrier airline or a 121 airline, that training is incredibly intense, and you want to be as prepared as you can when you get to training. You don't want to be rusty. You better be on the top of your game. So if you haven't gone to 121 training, anyone will tell you they still use the old, it's like drinking from a fire hose analogy, and it is. So, and what we have seen like I said, I've done thousands and thousands of pilot interviews over the years, both for 121 operations and 135 operations. So I want to share just a little bit with you about what I've learned, and hopefully that will help you do better when you get to those interviews. So the first one I want to talk about is probably the most common, which is CFIs. So that's probably the most common route that people take in time building, but not everyone is a teacher. So I know I have met multiple individuals that they don't want to build their time that way. They just don't want to teach. Completely understandable. Please don't, because we need good instructors, that are all in to give everyone the quality that they deserve. So I will say CFI is probably the quickest way to build time from, the ones that I have spoken to on some screening calls and things. I see CFIs getting upwards of 80 hours a month. Now that's a lot. That's probably on the high end. So, I would say anywhere between 60 to 80 a month is pretty good for CFI time building. I think some of these other ways of time building, excuse me, let me get some water. Other ways of time building, you're probably going to build a little less a month. Sorry about that. I do a lot of talking and my mouth gets dry. Now, I will say CFIs is probably one of the best ways to build time. It definitely helps to continue to develop that skill set. They usually do very well in interviews, and they usually do very well in training. So I would recommend, if you're thinking about that as time building, that's a great way to build time. You're still in training mode, right? So you went to flight school, then you became a flight instructor. You've kind of never left training mode, right? You were training, now you're training people. And so transitioning to another training, 121 training or what have you, is, I guess, a more seamless transition, because you're still in that mindset of training. So that definitely helps when you get to that stage and enter 121 training or 135 training. So those are some of the pros, right? One of the fastest ways to time build. You usually do well in interviews. Technical's pretty good, pretty strong. The one thing I would say is, if you're planning on building your time that way, try to get a variety of students. If you're teaching all private pilot students, some of the things I said aren't probably 100% true. Get instrument students. Those are great. Those are probably the best. Teaching instrument and teaching multi-engine are probably the best types of teaching to help you gain and improve your skill set that you already have. So that can be a con depending on what types of students you have. So try to get a variety of students. Again, flight instruction tends to be very weather dependent. So if you have all private pilot students and, it's a nice IFR day, but you don't have any instrument students, you might not fly. Makes it a bit difficult to have a steady paycheck at times. I can completely relate. I taught for about 10 years total. I kind of burn out. I'd leave it for a bit and then come back. So cumulatively about 10 years. So I know about that hard to make a paycheck piece. And sometimes there can be a lack of students as well. So you got the weather, lack of students. Depends on the flight school you work at. If you work at some of the larger flight schools, you're probably not going to have a shortage of students to fill up your schedule. So that's probably the most common pros and cons for building time as a CFI. So let's move on to 135 SIC. That's another pretty common way to build time. I see that a lot on resumes, and the ways that pilots have built time. So what's good? What are the pros about 135 SIC? One of the great things about it is you're operating in the environment that you're going to be in for your airline job or your next level up in your career. So just getting that exposure to operating in, Class Bravo airspace and just operating in the system and just getting more experience is good. That's if you're trying to get the most out of it. A lot of SIC positions, you're just kind of sitting there. You're not doing a lot. So I think it's up to you and what you choose to make of it. Learn as much as you can. Just don't sit there and keep the seat warm. Try to absorb everything that's happening. It will help you. So if you are doing that, your flying skill could suffer a little bit. So, make the most of being over there in that right seat. And then hopefully you have a great captain who is a good mentor to you, because that is helpful too. You can learn a lot from your captain. I've flown with a few that I think are permanent teachers, so they share so much, and I've learned so much from other crew members that I have flown with. So pick their brain, ask questions. You're there to learn. So there's possibly a few more cons to this type of time building than flight instruction. You're not getting any real flying. Maybe an empty leg here or there, if that airline allows it. So not getting a whole lot of flight time. If you don't upgrade to captain at the airline you're an SIC at, it's not too good for you. I've interviewed pilots who they went straight from SIC, didn't upgrade to captain in that aircraft at that company, and then just went looking for another job. A lot of them were very, very weak in the technical. And I attribute that partially to the way that they built their time, because the weaknesses that I saw seemed to be consistent, like weak on the same things with people building their time that way. So just be cautious. There is a way you can make it work for you and get what you need out of it, but I think you have to make more of an effort in these types of situations. And like I said, it could be detrimental if you're just along for the ride. So just don't be there for the ride, be there to learn. That's really what it should be about for you. The other thing I can say is that, taking these jobs and trying to catch up on currency usually doesn't work out. Any airline training that you go into, you need to be current. And if the job instrument current, right? If the job you've been doing, you haven't gotten very much instrument flying, you're going to be a little rusty, and you don't want to be rusty going into training. So make sure you get in a sim, you do whatever you need to do to make yourself good and current for those interviews. That's usually where I've seen where we've had maybe weaker interviews I just dropped my notes. That I've seen weaker interviews, and it was just due to them just not being real current on the instrument. So, make sure whatever you're doing, because the next couple ones I'm going to talk about don't do a lot of instrument flying. So I want you to be cautious of that you're getting some. Pardon me, I have to pick up my notes. Okay. All right. I have a couple more. Own your own aircraft. So we see that sometimes people own their own aircraft, or they own a share of an aircraft, and they're building time. So again, this can be something that can have a lot of cons if you're not cautious on how you do it. But let's talk about the pros. So the pros are, if you own your own aircraft, you have the ability to expose yourself to a wide range of flying conditions. You could fly across the country and experience, everything from, all kinds of weather, mountain flying, everything. And that is good. So, I would recommend, if you're building time in your own aircraft, file IFR and go on cross countries. When I look at a resume and I see that's how someone's built their time, I do have some concerns. And so I will ask questions. Well, what did you do when you were time building? And some people have done some great stuff. I've heard some great stories about what people have done, building time in their own aircraft. So just make sure you're just not out there poking holes in the sky, and, use as many of the skills you've learned as possible. That's really the point here to everything, is to stay current. And some of these time building jobs don't necessarily keep you current on everything. And that's the point. If you own your own aircraft, maybe it's cheaper, depending on whatever deal you have. But possibly it could be cheaper for you versus paying to build time if that's the route that you wanted to go. One of the things, so let's go over the cons. So one of the cons is there's really no structure. If you haven't been exposed to any professional flying 135 or something like that, there's really a gap in your knowledge there. It's different. And so that, just from, operational standpoint and, company SOPs and things like that, if you're not used to those type of operations or never seen them, it can be quite different from what you've exposed yourself to if you're just flying your own aircraft. Basically, you're just a general aviation pilot at that point applying for a job. So there are some knowledge points that could be missing if you're building time in your own aircraft. And that's why I'm telling you this. Like, these are the things that I have seen in my years of experience. And I want to tell you guys that, so maybe you do it differently. You make sure you are aware of these cons and don't let that stuff happen to you. Really just want you to be the best candidate you can be when you go for that interview. Sometimes these pilots do poorly in training as well, because of the lack of structure in the flying that they did. I can't say that I've interviewed very many pilots who built their time in their own aircraft that came in with a strong technical interview. I'm not saying that's you. I'm just saying that the people that I interviewed were very weak in a lot of areas. So make sure you're getting exposure to other things as much as possible. All right, moving on. Aerial survey, pipeline patrol type jobs. Those are also very common. We see a lot of pilots building time that way. That's probably second to flight instruction, I think, as far as, I'm just going off of what I've seen on resumes and what is the most common in their background, what types of jobs. And the level that I have worked at in the airline industry has been kind of entry level. You went to training, you built your time, and now you're presenting for an interview. So most of the time, no prior airline experience. For pros for aerial survey, pipeline patrol, I can't really think of a lot of pros other than you probably get some good stick and rudder time. But if it's all VFR, you're utilizing not all of your skill set, probably a really small percentage. And so a lot of your skills are getting dull when you do these jobs. Typically, so I don't really have a lot of pros. Maybe some of you who might be building time that way could put something in the comments and let me know a little bit more about it. And, if what I'm saying is 100% accurate. I'm simply basing this on, looking at people's work experience and then seeing how they present when they get to the interview. So, tell me some pros for aerial survey and pipeline patrol, because I really couldn't think of any, to be honest. Other than you're getting a paycheck and you're getting some hours, but they're not the best quality hours. So no IFR flying. Typically, you don't get a lot with these jobs unless there's some kind of unique one out there. I don't know. I've had pilots tell me, well, I shoot an approach on the way back, coming back into home airport or what have you, but that's not enough. That isn't gonna keep you as current as you need to be jumping into 121 training. So, you got to do more. And it could be you doing your approaches and on the way in, and then maybe you can just fly the simulator a little bit to get current on the things that you're not getting exposure to in that job. So those were the categories that I have. I would be very interested in other time building jobs and learning about those. So if some of you out there that are watching this are doing something different than the ones I mentioned, put something in the comments. I'll look into it. And if you have questions, if you want a little bit more detail on the stuff that I covered today, leave me some comments and I will answer those to the best of my knowledge. I'm happy to do that. Again, my goal here is just to help my peers in the aviation industry be rock stars when they go to their interviews. I've done a lot and I was like, gosh, I have all these great pointers that I need to share with, the next group of pilots that's, in training and time building right now that's looking to go get jobs out there. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, if a question comes up, maybe something I didn't mention that, you want to talk about, leave it in the comments. It was great talking to you today. Hopefully this will help some of you. I have another video on my YouTube channel about pilot resumes. I would recommend watching that as well. It's not as long as this one, but that one will give you some pointers on what they're looking for on pilot resumes as well, so that you can present your best resume and your best self. So thanks for tuning in. I'll be posting more frequently. I was taking a little break over the Thanksgiving, but thank you all, and I'll see you soon.